chocolate spots here and there. I'm spotted. See these spots? I ain't white. My shirt is white. My hair is white. My skin is not white. It is time to get past the idea of whiteness and blackness unless we're going to change the meaning of those words in the dictionary.
I love it.
Now, well, I don't know. Most people, particularly millennials, hate it. They say, Jane Elliott, we like our color. And I say, fine, then use the color you have. Your skin is a shade of brown. It is not black. I can see where your hair stops and your skin begins. And your hair is beautifully black. And your skin is delightfully caramel. It ain't black. And yours is cinnamon. Yours is cinnamon. Your hair is cinnamon. And your teeth are white. My teeth used to be white. They aren't anymore. Yours won't either as you get older. And pretty soon you'll be like me. You won't have any to brag about. But you see, we have used color by the gods of war long enough.
Definitely agree with you. And you know, it's a debate that I just read before we got online with you, Miss Jane Elliott. First of all, it's an honor to have you. I've said that so many times in email. I want to echo that again. And for people who are just tuning in to the Sistas Talk Podcast, we have a very special guest, guys. I know for Gen Zs, you guys have probably heard of her. If not, go Google her right now.
Google me.
My lovely co-host.
Hi, I'm Aisya Carroll.
And Miss Jane Elliott, please do the pleasure of telling our audience who you are and give them just a little bit of what sparked this whole diversity education training that you basically are the pioneer of today.
Well, number one, I'm not a pioneer, although I'm old enough to have been in a covered wagon. I'm not. Number two, I don't do training. I train cats and dogs and horses. I don't train people. I'm an and what sparked it was the obvious killing, the assassination of a man of color, Martin Luther King Jr., who had been one of our heroes of the month in February in my third grade classroom in all white, all Christian, Riceville, Iowa. And he was killed not because of what he was saying, but because if he and Malcolm X had gotten together, and they were getting closer and closer together as time went on, if they had gotten together, their followers would have upset the economic system in this country. And in order to prevent that happening, we had to see to it that they both died. And we did. Malcolm X is one of his followers, or one of the people who worked with his people, killed him. But he was killed with the agreement of the United States government, and sometime history will prove that. The government arranged for the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. There's not a doubt in my mind, but he was assassinated because he was getting too powerful. He had been one of our heroes of the month in February, and we were studying the Indian unit. And at that time, I didn't realize that the people we called Indians were people who were the descendants of those who had come to this continent from Africa between 10,000 and 20,000 years ago. The people that we call Indians came from Africa, just like everybody else on the face of the earth did. And I didn't know that at that time. And we were studying the Indian unit, and our lesson plan the next day was to learn the Sioux Indian prayer, which was taught to them by some pale-faced missionaries. Oh, great spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins. I decided that night, as I was ironing the teepee and watching the people who were talking about this killing on the news, and the things they were saying were absolutely unacceptable, I decided that not only was I going to teach my students that prayer the next day, I decided I was going to get it answered for them. I was going to judge them on the basis of the color of their eyes, just as Hitler judged people on the basis of the color of their eyes during the Holocaust. If you had brown eyes in Germany during the Hitler years from 1933 till 1945, they threw you into the gas chamber because they thought you might be a Jewish person who was trying to pass. I didn't invent this idea. I learned it from Adolf Hitler. I learned it when I was born in 1933 and the war was over. The Second World War was over in 1945. So he had to stop that nonsense then. I learned then what it's like to be treated unfairly on the basis of the color of your eyes. And so the next morning I went into my classroom and separated my students after we had talked about it, and they had agreed it sounded like a good idea. I separated my students on the basis of the color of their eyes. And since I'm blue-eyed and the majority of the students in that room were blue-eyed, brown-eyed people were on the top the first day. And I learned some things that I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know that if you ask children about people of color, they would repeat the same stereotypes that people in my family had heard all our lives, and that people in our neighborhood had said, and people in our school had said. And I realized that these little 9-year-olds had learned everything they knew about people of color from people like me. And I didn't like what I learned that day, but I learned more than I wanted to know, and it was absolutely amazing. And when we reversed the exercise on the following Monday, those blue-eyed people who had been on the bottom the first day, instead of getting even with the brownies, as they had sworn they were going to do on Friday, instead of getting even, we discussed it then on Tuesday, but instead of getting even on Monday, those blue-eyed kids, when we discussed it on Tuesday, and I asked them, why didn't you blue-eyed boys get even? You said you were going to. They said that year and every year after that, because we found out how it feels to be on the bottom, and we decided we didn't want to make anybody feel the way we felt when we were on the bottom.
Wow.
That is, that's the only hope that melanemic, which is the word we use instead of white, pale faces, that's the only hope that pale faces have, that people of color don't want to treat us the way we have treated them. And that fear that they will is one of the major fears among melanemic people in the United States today. If those people get on top, they're going to do to us what we've done to them. And that fear is expressed to me every time I do a speech, every time I do a virtual thing. Somebody says, well, aren't they going to want to get even? And I say, well, I don't think so, but you better hope I'm right. You better. And I made those remarks at the University of Houston a couple of years ago. And Angela Davis was on the stage with me. And this woman stood and said, well, if those people, we knew who she was talking about when she said those people. Half the audience was dark, and there were 1,500 people in that room. She said, if those people get power, aren't they going to want to do to us what we've done to them? I said, that's your major fear, isn't it? She said, yes, it is. I said, well, let's find out. So I said to this audience, and half of it were young, dark-skinned males, dark-skinned children. They didn't consider themselves children, students. I said, well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the Black race and who wants to get even with all white folks, please stand. 3 young Black males stood. The rest of them just looked at him like, are you crazy? I said, see, they don't want to get even with all of us. Does that make you feel better? And she said, I think it does. I said, I'm glad. Now let's be honest about it. Well, every person of color who considers himself or herself Black in this audience who wants to get even with 1 or 2 white people, please stand. They all leaped to their feet, cheering and laughing and high-fiving one another. And this woman began to look really frightened. I said, now you aren't as comfortable as you were, are you? She said, no, I'm not. I said, well, you need to realize they don't want to get even with all of us, but every one of them wants to get even with 1 or 2 of us. Now, the way you solve your problem is don't be one of the 1 or 2 they want to get even with. Behave in such a way that they don't want to get even with you. Does that make sense to you? And she said, well, I think so. And I said to the audience, does that make sense to you? And they all cheered and laughed and high-fived one another again. You see, the point is, if we treat people the way they want to be treated, or even the way we want to be treated, we can turn this thing around. But not everybody wants to be treated the way I want to be treated. You don't want to be treated the way I want to be treated. I'm 87 years old. I know you don't want the same treatment that I get. And I can't take the treatment that you get. I'd have to learn to run again. I'm not going to run again unless I'm running toward a man my age who's healthy and smells like Old Spice. Then I'll run and I'll catch that sucker. Anyway, getting right along. Okay, I've learned more than I wanted to know, but I've learned some things that are extremely valuable. Skin color isn't the problem. And so now I wear this shirt that says, God created one race, the human race. Human beings created racism. We deliberately created racism between 500 and 600 years ago. Before that, there was slavery, but it didn't depend on skin color. There were different cultures, and there still are, but it didn't depend on skin color. There are different languages, there are different lots of things, but you weren't judged negatively because of the color of your skin until we invented that. And we have practiced what we preach never.
So
go ahead.
So I have a question for you. In regards to the criminal justice system, and how it works when it comes to Black children of color. Are you okay?
I swallowed wrong, went down the wrong tube.
Okay.
It'll be all right. Those things happen. See, that happens to me. That doesn't happen to you. Go ahead. If I had been drinking something more powerful than water, I wouldn't care. Go ahead. When it comes to children of color.
Children of color. So I'm a child advocate for Black and Brown students, and it's a situation that happened with a little boy named Razine, and he is 16 years old. He's autistic. He's a Black boy who is actually going to be tried as an adult. He has autism. He has ADHD, and he is the sweetest little boy you can ever meet. How is it okay that the judicial system is failing our children, and they just tell us that it is a system that's broken and we just have to deal with it? Like, what steps would you give, or what advice would you give to this mother that's fighting for her son?
Keep on fighting, number one, but also read the book. And she isn't going to want to read this book, but you read it and tell her what it says, okay? Because she has enough trouble trying to keep her son alive.
Right.
There's a book called The Color of Law. And you need to realize that the laws are written in this country by people who have been told for 600 years that if you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, hang around. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're red, if you're black, get back. And if you're red, you're dead. That's the way we treat people. We've learned that little rhyme for 500 years. You need to read the book, The Color of Law, and realize that laws are written by people who don't know any better.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so you read that book, and if you don't want to read the whole thing, I think it's page 2. I don't have it with me right now because it's in Iowa. Maybe page 241. Anyway, in that area, there's a page in that area that tells exactly what you have to do and what you have to think and how we fix this thing. It's time to fix this thing, because the judge that is going to judge this thing is going to judge this thing on the basis not of the color of this young man's skin, but on the ignorance of this judge and on the ignorance of the people who write these laws. You have to get past that ignorance before you can be judged fairly in the United States of America. We've got to quit talking about the criminal justice system, because that is an oxymoron. Our justice system is criminal.
Yes.
We'd better start calling it something other than criminal justice. That's an oxymoron. It can't be both. It is that this young man is not a criminal. He is the result of his and his parents and his grandparents' adaptation to the natural environment. Mm-hmm. He has a right to be understood. He has a right to be heard. And the law simply has to treat him at least as well as they would treat a pale-faced boy who is autistic.
Right.
And you know that if he were pale-faced and autistic, they would treat him, they would first deal with the fact that he's autistic.
Right.
And then they would do that first, because they would first see him in a more positive way than they see this child of a different color.
Exactly.
You're dealing with the ignorance of our legal system. And you're going to have to hire a lawyer that has read the book, The Color of Law, and who is at least 35 years old, maybe a little younger, because he still hasn't been in school or been miseducated long enough to believe in the lie of several races. Mm-hmm. There's only one race. This child is a child of color, and he's a member of your race and a member of my race. There's only one race, the human race. This child has the right to expect to be treated as the Constitution says he will be treated, with equal treatment under the law. And you have to insist that he gets that.
Absolutely.
But first you have to get past the ignorance of the lawyers and the laws written in this country.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Razine and his mom, they're doing well. We're just going to keep fighting as much as we can.
You're going to have to fight every minute until you get him out of the hands of the police. You've got to get him out of the criminal justice system and say to them, he belongs in a system that deals with people who have learning disabilities.
Right.
He has a learning disability. He doesn't have a criminal attitude. He has a learning disability, a learning difference. In his case, it's a disability. But however, if the people who supposedly were paid to educate him, mm-hmm. he wouldn't be in the situation he is, even if he has a learning difference, because they would have recognized that and he would have learned what he needs to learn. They didn't. If they want to try something, if they want to find somebody responsible for what he did, go to the school. Find the education system responsible for what they failed to do with that child because they didn't know how to handle it. And I say, if you don't know how to handle children, leave the teaching profession and go into some other line of work, like be a dog catcher. But do not be an educator if you don't know how to deal with every child. Every child has a way. There's a way that you can reach every child. Teachers could have reached that boy if they had decided they had to. And if that child were lighter colored, he would not be in the situation he's in now. I'll bet you.
Absolutely. Jane, I actually talked to Aisya about this, and I told her to gather all the teachers. Anybody who is a witness to this child's disabilities needs to be in that courtroom when it happens. And we thank you for being transparent and honest, because that's one thing we don't get enough of in today's society. And, you know, last night I was watching a clip of you on Oprah's show in 1992. And it was profound, guys. Guys, go check it out right now on YouTube after the show, of course. Jane, you killed it. You had a lot of white people angry at you, and they were turning all sorts of colors because you put that green collar around their necks, and you told them they couldn't eat I had one grown lady stood up and said, well, the other people had donuts upstairs, and the staff, Oprah's staff, was rude to me, and I don't understand. Our eye color makes no difference. And tell me if I'm wrong. What I gathered from that short, I wouldn't call it experiment.
No, that was not experiment. Exercise, experience.
Experience, yes. They could not take it, Jane.
No.
It blew my mind. So I want to know from your personal experience, because I've seen you do this worldwide. I even mentioned some of this in my book, Female Minority Report. I really like the blue eye versus brown eye. These people were breaking down. And I said to myself, how could you walk a day in my shoes as a Black woman?
Mm-hmm. No, they can't. They couldn't possibly. And that's what they're afraid of. Make no mistake about this. They are scared to death that if you and people who look like you, who are your color, get power, they're going to be on the receiving end of that which they have dished out. Mm-hmm. And that is why they elected a man who said openly, we'll have to put a wall along the southern border of the United States so not so many of those brown-skinned people come in here, because brown-skinned people reproduce too rapidly. He said that openly, and because I think, not in spite of, but because of that, they elected him. 40% of the population of the United States elected that fool. And he also said, we're closing all these Planned Parenthood clinics because evidently somebody had told him about the book by Ben Wattenberg, which is full of lies, which said in the first paragraph of the first page, the main problem confronting the United States today is there aren't enough white babies being born in this country now. 60% of the fetuses that are aborted every year are white. If we don't do something about that and do it now, white people will become a numerical minority, and this will no longer be a white man's land. Now, in the first paragraph of the first page of that book, written by Ben Wattenberg, who was an advisor to presidents of the United States, was a brilliant Jewish man, wrote that book, and then he told 3 things we were going to have to do to take care of this. He said, first, there are ways we could solve this problem. We could pay women to have babies, as they have been doing in Western European nations for years. Then he says, and these are his words, not mine, unfortunately, we would have to pay women of all colors to have babies, so we don't want to do that. This is in his book. He says the second thing we could do is allow more legal immigrants to come into this country. Then once again, unfortunately, the vast majority of people wanting to come to this country today are people of color, so we don't want to do that. He said the third thing we could do is remember that 60% of the fetuses that are aborted every year are white. If we could keep that 60% alive, that would solve our birth dearth. Now think about that. And that book and he got some really ugly responses to that. So he rewrote the book and they republished the book. And he didn't put that in the first paragraph. Instead, he put in a whole lot of tables and graphs and charts that proved what he wanted to prove, but he didn't say it right out there where everybody would have to look at it. He needs to remember that Ben, and he's dead. I'm sorry, I would have loved to have attacked him. I'm sorry, but he wrote a terrible book and people believed it. And Mr. Donosaurus T. Rump, obviously somebody told him about what Ben Wattenberg had written. which is the reason we closed the Planned Parenthood clinics, build a wall along the southern border of the United States. This is all a bunch of who shot John. You need to know that. Benjamin Disraeli said, there are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. He lied with his first book. Those were damn lies. And so he covered them up with the second book with statistics. I can't find a copy of that first book. I had 3 copies. I loaned them out. Nobody gave them back. If you can find me a copy of the book that Ben Wattenberg wrote in 1987, The Birth Dearth, I think you can get it someplace. If you look hard enough, you can get it for $687. I'd pay the $600. I paid the $600 to get my hands on it. I'd pay the people who borrowed mine to give it back to me, because I need that book to prove that I'm not lying about this. Right. And then you look at the QAnon people and the Oath Keepers and the KKK and what used to be Posse Comitatus and the Order. All these people are following the dictates of Ben Wattenberg's book. And you need to realize that none of this is an accident. And our recently refused to be elected president was also following his dictates. It was an evil statement that he made. And you need to realize that in this country, within 30 years, pale-faced people like me will be a numerical minority. That's a fact. And you can't keep it from happening because that's the way it is. That doesn't mean that this country is going to become dumber. It's just going to become darker, which is a good thing, because the more melanin you have in your skin, the more protection you have from the dangerous rays of the sun.
That's right.
Now you want to keep that thought in mind, because as the ozone layer gets a bigger and bigger hole in it because of our misuse of fossil fuels, more and more sunlight will be allowed to enter our environment, and more people who are pale faces will die of melanoma, which is a skin cancer that you get because your body doesn't have enough protection from the dangerous rays of the sun. As time goes on, our society is going to get darker and darker, because pale faces are going to find out, if you want your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to live, to survive, you'd better mate with someone whose skin isn't the color of mine.
So Jane, what I'm taking from all of this awesome information you're giving us in the audience, it seems to me that this systematic divide, oppression, inequality really comes from somebody's idea of surviving in a way.
It comes from ignorance.
Exactly. They thought that this would be a way for them to survive. Absolutely.
But it comes from ignorance, because we don't know any better. If every person, and I mean every person, would get, and you can't because it costs you $85 now, but the National Geographic magazine company came out with this magazine in April of 2018. You see those 2 girls?
Yes.
One is white, supposedly, and one is called black. Would you call them biracial?
I would call both biracial. Maybe even the one that's considered white.
You'd be wrong about both of them.
They're both black?
No, they're both human beings.
They're human.
They're both members of the human race. There's only one race. Black isn't a race. White isn't a race. Those are color groups that are misnamed. This child isn't a member of the black color group. Look at her skin. Is this black? Her hair is black, her skin's not. Look at this girl. Their faces are not the same color, but they are not biracial. They are mosaic. A mosaic is an art form that is new, unique, beautiful, and made of many elements. That's what these 2 girls are. And there is nothing negative about a mosaic. These children are 2 mosaics. Now you get into this magazine, and you get more and more, you think more and more, oh my God, why didn't I know? This is a map. And this map should be taken out and enlarged and fixed so that you can't tear it. This shows where we came from and where those brilliant, very dark-skinned people moved to populate every landmass on the face of the earth. Every one of us came from right there. If every human being on the face of the earth would trace their DNA back as far as they could, they'd find out that a percentage of it came from right there, from a country in Africa. We all came from the same place for the sake of the human beings, and for God's sake, get over it. And I know people who want to be called black are going to get angry, and they are going to say, I'm going to continue to be black. You've never been black, and you're never going to be black. Relax, get comfortable. Tell your children that they are beautiful and they are different colored. Look at this. In that magazine, there are these pictures of these people. All of these are members of the same race. And which race is that? Let's say it all together now.
The human race.
Human, thank you. All of these are members of the same race. Some of them have very dark skin, but it isn't black. Some of them have very light skin, but it isn't white. We are all shades of brown. Now, if you want to create something that'll teach children the truth instead of learning the lie, it makes no sense to continue to learn the lie. Get a copy of the Pantone color wheel. It has the colors of every human color on it. You hang it on the wall, and then you say to these 9-year-olds, if I were teaching 3rd grade right now, I'd do it. If I were teaching high school, I'd do it. I'd say, each of you go up to the Pantone color wheel, put your hand, the back of your hand, there's your side of your hand, against those colors until you find one that matches your hand, your skin. Then decide what you think that is, and then go to the thesaurus. And this is the way you educate. Go to the thesaurus, a hard word to say, but you can say it if you try, and find a synonym for brown. There are almost 100 synonyms for brown in the thesaurus. So you pick out the one that you think matches your skin color, and then go to the dictionary, and you'll find a description of that color. Find that color that you think matches your skin, find that name, and find out what color that is. We could change this thing in 2 generations if we decided to. And we're going to have to. We're going to have to. We are all shades of brown, and we are all 30th to 50th cousins. You are my 30th to 50th cousins, whether you like it or not. That's the way it is. And you are to me. I'm not denying what you are when I say I don't see you black. I see your hair black, and I see your skin maybe caramel, but it ain't the color of your hair. Now, what you can do to make it all right is do what little black boys sometimes do. They try to bleach their skin so that they'll get less black. If being called black were such a wonderful thing, we wouldn't have kids trying to bleach their skin. And if being called white were such a wonderful thing, we wouldn't encourage children to dislike the color of their skin. And we would stop misnaming it. We would say we're all members of the same race, and we are all shades of brown.
Very important point you're making. I have a question, because oftentimes when I talk to people, as it relates to anything that I do, when it comes to not just the human race, how we try to dice it up based on colors, I have people that they make race and poverty synonymous. And to me, they aren't. They're not one and the same. Now, due to systematic oppression, you've seen groups of people of the human race of darker skin that are placed in poverty-stricken areas. They don't have resources allocated to them properly, which brings me to my question to you. What is your take on the darker portion of the human race receiving reparations for all of the injustices, such as, inabilities to take out a mortgage on their home because of the color of their skin? This was less than, 50 years ago. And when you think about the Jim Crow law, you think about slavery, you think about the ramifications of generational curses, meaning we don't have generational wealth because of the color of our skin and the environment in which we were enslaved. What is your take on that?
Number one, we have reinstituted slavery with the prison system. Make no mistake about that. We can pick up a young man on the street for something that is totally ridiculous. And if a pale-faced person were doing it, he wouldn't be going to jail. We can send him to jail because he can't afford good counseling. So he goes to prison. And once he's there, he has to work 8 hours a day, gets paid maybe 22 cents an hour. And I mean, he works producing products for companies that send their raw materials into the prison system, because they can get those products made more cheaply in the prison system than they can if they get them made outside the prison system or in another country. If you furnish a man's food or a person's food, their clothing, their lodging, and keep them and won't let them out of a cage, that's called slavery. That's what we did in slavery times. we are still doing that. And if he works 8 hours a day, makes 22 cents an hour, the victim of his crime gets the money. If he's picked up on the street for arguing with a law officer, there's no victim to that crime. So where does the money go? It goes into the prison system to support more prisons. It makes communities very happy to have a prison come to their community, because that prison will employ 300 people in that community, guarding those people who are prisoners, in many cases, because of a teeny tiny infraction of the law that was made greater by them arguing with or resisting arrest. This makes no sense. This is why I say criminal justice system is exactly what it is. It's a justice system that is criminal. And it is that way, not because we're a vicious society, but because we believe in the myth of race and the myth of the rightness of whiteness. And until we educate people who are going to write our laws to realize that that was a lie, that there's only one race and we're all members of it, and every one of us has the right to respect and the right to our rights, until we do that, we'll continue to have this kind of situation going on. As long as we teach the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and only one of those begins with R. Reading begins with R. Writing begins with W, and arithmetic begins with A. So we don't even tell the truth about that. We aren't teaching the 3 R's. We're teaching nonsense. But if we would start teaching the 3 R's of rights, respect, and responsibility, we could turn this thing around in 2 generations. If we taught students that every child has the same rights as every other child in that classroom, every child deserves respect, and so do the teachers, as long as they're acting in a respectable fashion. And we must hold people responsible when they refuse to respect the rights of every child. And I mean, we hold every person responsible, not just the other students, not just their peers, but their educators and their administrators, and the janitors and the cooks in the kitchen have to be respectful of the rights of every student. Until we do that, we will continue to have this kind of nonsense. What was the question? I can keep from forgetting the question.
This is good. This is good. My question to you is, what is your take on darker skinned people of the human race receiving reparations?
I'm all for that, particularly in view of the fact that the first people who came to this continent came from Africa. And we called them Indians because we didn't know any better. And they're living on reservations and aren't allowed to leave. And the government pays them very little and keeps them on that res. And if you think they don't deserve reparations, you go to any Navajo reservation right now and see people living on dirt floors with no electricity and no running water. And the hospital is 100 miles away. And Navajo are dying in greater numbers than any other group in the United States of COVID-19, because we've been trying to kill them off ever since we Europeans got here. So if you're going to offer reparations to people who came from Africa, you offer them first to the Navajo and the Sioux and the Arapaho and that whole group of people that we gave those fancy names to, who really are people who came here from Africa. The first people who came from Africa did not come here as slaves. They came here as explorers and adventurers. And when we got here, and they were taking care of the land, they didn't take care of it the way we wanted them to. So when we palefaces got here, we Europeans, or we people from the British Isles got here, we fixed it, because that's what we do. One of the major differences between people of color and colorless people is when colorless people come into a new environment, they immediately adjust the environment to fit their needs, which is exactly what we've done. When people of color come into a new environment, they immediately adjust their needs to fit into the environment. They live in the environment as it is, and they preserve it because that's Mother Earth and Father Sky. And they don't offend Mother Earth if they can possibly avoid it. There's a perfect example of that. Is what's happened in Hawaii over the last 100 years. Hawaiians were perfectly happy dressing according to the weather and doing their thing and living off the land. But we got there with our Christian missionaries, and the first thing we did was teach them to put on clothes, get dressed, so that we can't be tempted by your beautiful figures, for the love of heaven. And we did it for the love of heaven. Make no mistake about that. We did it, and we blessed ourselves while we were doing it. We immediately changed their environment to fit our needs. And their needs, we could decide what their needs were. And their needs should be the same as ours. They weren't. Those people were the right color for that environment and for that amount of sunlight, and they were doing a good job. But we went in and decided that we are tempted by your beautiful bodies, so we're going to see to it that we don't have to look at them. We have been doing that for enough years now. It's time to get over it.
So
you want to give reparations, give them to the first African Americans that came here. And then those people will say, if you care about us, we'll care about you. And instead of you having to give back all their land, which is what you're going to have to do if you're going to really give reparations, they will say to you, you can have this portion of our land because you were kind enough to give us back part of what we gave to you, what you stole from us.
So I partially agree with you.
I know, that's good. Partially is good.
Well, the reason I say partially is because it has been proven by historians that darker skinned people were here prior to the Native Americans, which are considered to be Aborigines, and their skin was way darker than the Native Americans, and they killed them off. And so, you know,
Native Americans are what we call Aborigines. That wasn't a new group that formed. Those Native Americans came from Africa. And as they moved farther and farther from the equator, their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. That's the only reason they had lighter skin, lighter hair, and lighter eyes. They had wars between the tribes. Many of them were practicing war in order to get good at it. But they all came from the same place. Obviously, their bodies responded differently to the physical environment. That's part. Oh well, I'm not going to get into that with you, but you need to know that we Europeans killed off. First, we tried to enslave them. Those people who were here that we called Indians, because we thought we didn't know what we were talking about. We killed a bunch of them. First, we tried to enslave them. That didn't work because they could get away and go into the nearest village, and we couldn't tell them apart. So we couldn't use them for slaves. So we decided we'd have to find a way to get slaves that we could identify as being deserving of being enslaved. So we went to Hull, England, and bought a whole bunch of people who they had taken from Africa and brought them to this country and turned them into slaves. You see, we'll twist this history as long as we possibly can to make it all right for us to have done what we continue to do today. We're still doing it. We owe something to those that we brought over here as slaves. We also owe a great deal to those whose land we stole and whose people we killed. The first thing we have to do is admit that we did it. We don't even admit that we did it. We pretend it wasn't our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. We're fine. If you just shut up and listen, you'd be all right. No, you need to know. Get the book, The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman. Read that book.
And then I would say, not to interrupt, I think part of the biggest problem we're talking about the darker hues of people here right now on this continent, North America, is that number one, it was against the law to read. Number two, when we started reading, we had a lot of misinformation. I think even, speaking back on a book that you were mentioning earlier, he put a lot of BS out there. So you kind of don't know. We're just getting into the age of information where we can decipher the difference between real, true facts, real history that actually happened versus some made up piece of crap that's just put there at the forefront to continue to, for a better word, whitewash the way we think. And that's right. Particularly designated to North America for what I've noticed and witnessed on my own.
Most of what you are taught in social studies, K through 12 in this country, is anti-social studies. It is anti-social to teach that one group is better than the other because of their body's reaction to the natural environment. That has nothing to do with intelligence. And you need to remember that those who are classified as white are less than, I think it's between 15 and 18% of the population of the world. Between 15 and 18% of the population of the world is classified white. We have been a numerical minority forever. Pale-faced people have been a numerical minority forever. And we have to kill in order to convince people that we know what we're talking about. And we're perfectly willing to do that because it proves that we are superior because we have more firepower. We have to get used to the fact that it isn't working. And it isn't going to work. Within 30 years, we are going to be a numerical minority in this country. And we have to get used to that idea. We have to get used to seeing people of color as being just as brilliant, in fact, in many cases, more brilliant than we colorless people are. We have to see that they are not wanting to get even. And when they talk about reparations, I think they don't want to take my father's farm, 160 acres. They don't want to take that. What they want is to have the right to farm if they choose to have the right to own property if they choose to have the right to live where they want to, where if they choose to. We have taken those rights away from them because of our ignorance about skin color and our absolute determination to perpetuate the lie of several different races. I looked up race on Wikipedia last week. I had to find some information, all right? So I went to Wikipedia, that's where you go. And it said there are 3 races, Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and Negroid. That was listed in Wikipedia this week. People, there are not 3 races. There's only one. It's Homo sapiens. And if you don't believe me, get the book Sapiens by a man whose last name is Harari, Harari. Get the book Sapiens. There are parts of it that you will burst out laughing because he treats this whole thing in a really interesting and amusing way. Get the book Sapiens and then realize that it's time to give it up, people. It has caused us as much dislocation and as many problems as we need to have. Treating people positively or negatively on the basis of our ignorance about skin color has gone on long enough. Skin color is natural. Ignorance about skin color is also natural. You can't change the color of your skin. You can change the level of your ignorance. And you get that with education.
I have a very in-depth question. I didn't mean to interject again, but it's heavy on my mind. What makes colorless versus colored human beings so vastly different in the way we think about each other, in our experiences, and what we believe? What makes us so different? Because we can see over a course of history, there's polarizing differences here.
But these 2 words are polarizing. White and black are polar opposites. If you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, you're all wrong. That's all you have to do is look in the dictionary. All you have to do is look in the thesaurus, and you'll see that all the synonyms for white are pleasant and wonderful. All the synonyms for black are ugly. We have been conditioned to this myth pre-birth. A group of registered nurses called me last year and asked me if I would come in and talk to them in Los Angeles. I said, why? They said, we work in delivery rooms. I said, well, I was in a delivery 4 times in 5 years. I gave birth to 5 times, but 5 times I don't know anything about medicine. I know about how to get pregnant and I know about how to give birth, but I don't know anything about medicine. They said, that's not what we want to talk about. I said, what do you want me to talk about? She said, we want you to talk about racism. I said, why? She said, because we work in delivery rooms. And we know that black and brown women don't get the same treatment in delivery rooms that white women do. She said, and we're all going to be midwives, and we're going to see to it that when those children are delivered, whatever their color, whatever their skin color, they're going to be treated fairly. I said, I'll talk to your people. So I went and I talked to a group of about 50 midwives of different colors. And I said, here's what I believe. Here's what I see. Here's what I believe. You can argue with me till hell freezes over, but let me tell you something. When I started doing this 50 years ago, my people made fun of me. I lost all my so-called friends. My relatives stopped speaking to me. And after my father died, my mother kicked me out of the family because I had destroyed her reputation in that community. And I thought at the time, well, there's only 1,000 people in town. That's not so bad. But then I had also, it has become amusing to me now. But I said to those people, 50 years from now, you will have gained a whole lot. We will make changes in the next 50 years. 50 years ago, people wouldn't speak to me on the street, and neither would you have if you had been living in Riceville, Iowa, because it wasn't good sense to be seen talking to the town's only N-word lover. And that's what I was called, and that's what my kids were called, and that was my husband was called, the husband of the town's only N-word lover. Now I could walk away, I could move to a different location and pretend that I had never done that job if I had ever wanted to. But I moved my kids out of that school because one of the teachers, that the principal's wife said, who was teaching at the high school, said, "Get your kids out of this school, Jane." I said, "Why?" "Because these teachers are trying to destroy your children." That's what happened 50 years ago where my kids and I were concerned. 50 years from now, people are going to say we were wrong. I don't want to wait 50 years for melanemic people to realize that they've been wrong for the last 500 years. I don't want to wait any longer. And you shouldn't have to wait one more damn day for people to say to you, you are equally human. We are human. We are the same. Look at it this way. We are so afraid to have people of color come into our environment. We do not want those differences. If you would look at our insides, we are all very colorful. Think about that. And each of the parts of our bodies are responsible for doing something else. Each of our parts, my thumb doesn't look like my nose.
Mhm.
My eyes don't look like my mouth. My ears don't do the same function that my feet do.
Right.
I tell people, God gave you 2 feet so that you could walk and run and stand. Get off your knees and get on your feet and make a difference. And do it now. I believe in the power of prayer. But let me tell you, those people who are praying against social justice are praying just as hard as you are for social justice. And that's how we got a fool of a boy in the White House for 4 years. I remember when Richard Nixon said to a group of white reporters, "I'm trying to save the White House for you white people." Oh yeah. Now he was pretty reasonable about racism, except that when he made that remark, he exposed his whole philosophy.
Mhm.
I'm trying to save the White House for you white people. I get really strange. I want to rename the White House. I want to call it the President's Residence, because that's what it is. But we call it the White House deliberately. We know, even though it was built by slave labor, and those were people of color, it is still called the White House.
Exactly.
I've been to Washington, D.C., and so have a lot of people. And there are lots of White Houses in Washington, D.C. There's only one president's residence, and that's what it should be called. We perpetuate racism by things like that. We perpetuate racism by what we teach in the schools. If you think that Columbus discovered America, you probably went to school, and you probably graduated from high school. Columbus didn't discover America. You can't discover a place where people are already living. They discovered it before you got there.
Right. And you know how many generations it took for people to wake up and realize that? It really
They haven't yet. If they had woken up and realized that, you wouldn't be talking to me now.
That's true. Good point.
No, we would never have elected Adonisaurus T. Rump. We would not have wanted to be as our leader, a person who thinks like a dinosaur.
That's right.
We would never have done that. That would not have happened. People have not waked up, and they aren't going to, because it's dangerous for them to wake up and realize that if your self-image and how you feel about yourself and your family depends on the amount of a chemical in your skin, you got a problem.
Oh, yes.
And I think that's why it's so important for people to read Danielle's book, The Female Minority Report, because it shares her experience of being a woman of melanin descent in corporate America and her experiences. And so many other women of melanated descent are experiencing disparities in the workplace. And so we need to be sure that we're not treating people of color differently when they're in corporate America.
But we have to be even more careful that we don't allow melanemic people, which means white people, particularly males, to assume an intelligence and a knowledge and an ability that they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
I have a sign on my wall at home that says, "Whatever women do, they must do twice as well as men to be thought half as good."
Mm-hmm.
Whatever a person of color does, he or she has to do twice as well as colorless people do to be thought half as good. That's the way it is. You know that, and I know that. And now, so are melanemic people beginning to understand that, oh, good Lord, look at what Barack Obama tried to do and would have gotten done if it hadn't been for Mitch McConnell. And look at what that colorless person did in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
You compare those two, and then you can't possibly say we have proof in this presidential situation that colorless people are not superior to people of color. We have proof of that now. And that's one of the reasons I think for 500 years, melanated people, white people, have been denying that people of color are being treated badly. Then along comes the killing of George Floyd.
Yep.
And suddenly, melanated people saw that over and over and over on their television. Now, why did they show that so many times on television? Every time they showed that, some little child of color, some little boy of color had to shudder, and his mother had to shudder, knowing that they were trying to teach those young males what could happen to them if they didn't behave themselves where the police were concerned. It was a crime for them to show that as often as they did, except that, well, that was an awful thing for George Floyd and his parents, his family, his friends, and everybody else who watched it. It's a really good thing because that woke up a whole lot of pale faces who were willing to say, oh my God, look at what they did, and look at how they're going to get away with it. And this is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Minnesota has something like 2% people of color, less than 2% are people of color. And this is what they did to that young man. And then people of all colors, not of all races, because there's only one, but of all colors, all genders, sexual orientations, all ages, all sizes came into the streets protesting. That's the best thing that has happened in this country in the last 150 years. And what happened January 6th, when that same ridiculous group of fools came to Washington, D.C., because they were told that they were going to change this situation so that we wouldn't lose our society to people of color, followed this Pied Piper into the wilderness. And now there they are. And they are going to be in jail. They are going to be fined. They are going to have a name for the rest of their lives. They followed the wrong person.
Yep.
10,000 people made fools of themselves on January 6th. In the future, just as I remember what Hitler did during the Nazi years from 1933 till 1945, young people today will remember for the next 50 years what happened in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. And when they see someone behaving the way Donosaurus T. Rump has, they will, and running for office, they'll say, wait, back up the truck here, fellas. We've seen this before. We're not going to go along with this. We recognize this. That was a horrible thing that they did, but it is something that you need to remember so that you see to it that it never happens again. It's a cautionary tale. Use it as such.
I love it. Aisya, did you have any further questions for Miss Jane Elliott?
I do have one last question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I just found out about a term called adultification bias. And basically it states that Black girls are treated differently in schools and looked at as an adult and treated as such. And so now they're doing further research to prove that this term adultification bias has been going on for so long. And so now they're starting to bring out the statistics in regards to Black women and how we felt as being a young girl growing up. Do you have any views on that?
Well, I have a view on it that psychologists and psychiatrists aren't going to like. I call it bullshit. And I was raised on a farm, and I recognize it when I see it. I am sick and tired of people using polysyllabic words to describe problems that have a simple beginning and a simple solution. Adultification. We are treating Black girls as if they are adults and treating Black boys as if they are infants. I don't think so. I think what we're doing is we have educators who don't know how to educate and who have been raised in a situation in which they see anything that Black girls do as we have to find fault with it. If white girls were accused of acting like adults, that would be all right. But if it's Black girls, then we can't control them so easily. You see, I'm sick of words like unconscious bias and conscious bias. I think you know whether you're a racist or not. I think I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I know psychologists are going to cut me to ribbons over this, but adultification of Black women. Is that what they're saying?
So
Is that the
basically,
word?
what happens is in the school districts, the teachers are punishing the Black girls more severely than they are for white girls. And I've seen it in the schools, like the school district where I live. The suspension rate is about 96% in the middle school, and so for Black students compared to 7% to the white students. And so basically they're doing this research to bring awareness to the teachers and the educators to show them that they are absolutely treating the Black girls differently and giving them harsher punishments.
Do you really think the teachers don't know that they're doing that?
Oh yeah, I know they are.
Of course they know they're doing that. But you see,
Absolutely.
if you give it a really big name like adultification of Black teenagers, then it gives we come up with all these words as a justification for behaviors that are absolutely unacceptable. And people accept them because they came from educated people. Look, they've done studies in this country that prove that the longer you stay in school, the more bigoted you become. Because the longer you stay in school, the longer you are reinforced in what you learn grades K through 12. We go into professions where we are reinforced in what we learn grades K through 12. And the longer we're in school, the more letters we have behind our name, the
Right.
more we must know. But if we only build on what we learned and when we were K through 12, that is not education. That is indoctrination.
Yeah.
That is, we'll continue this, we'll build on this so that you will act more and more ignorant instead of more and more intelligent and more educated. I'm an educator. The word educator comes from the root duc dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. And you can't do that if you go around making up polysyllabic words that make it difficult for people to listen to what you're saying, because you'll come up with one of those words first in the first sentence you say, and then the kids are listening to it, have to figure out what the hell was it that she just said with that word. And then you've said all this other stuff and they don't hear the rest of it because they're trying to figure out that word. I talked to a young student, a junior in high school from a high school in someplace near Chicago. And she said that they are talking about careless racism. I think that's the term she used. I said, what? She said, yeah, careless racism. I said, where did you hear that term? She said, that's what our administrator says we have to call it. I said, has anybody attacked him for that? Well, no, you can't attack him. I said, give me his name. Oh, I don't want to tell you who it is. I said, that's a really good idea, because he needs to know that there ain't no such thing as careless racism. You are either a racist or you aren't a racist. And if you behave in a racist way, whether carelessly or carefully, somebody else has the right to say to you, do you realize what you just said? And do you realize how that is received by somebody like me? There is a list of typical statements that everybody who is listening to this needs to see. It's on my website, and I got it from a book about racism, and I could remember the name of the book. Anyway, the first here is right here. This list came from Judith Katz's book, White Awareness. Now, there's a lot of good stuff in that book, but there's some stuff that you ought to ignore. However, one of the things in Judith Katz's book, White Awareness, is a list of typical statements. Put an X before those statements that represent your present beliefs and an O before those that represent previously held beliefs. Once you have done that, then you go to the clarification of the typical statements. For instance, people say to me, and they did when I did the exercise in Riceville, they said, why is she doing that exercise here? We don't have any racism in Riceville. We don't have any N-words. And everybody agreed, yeah, she's wrong to say, we don't have any racism. You can't have racism without those people. Racism, we think, exists only where minorities exist. Remove those minorities and we won't have these problems. That, according to the clarifications, it says the problem is in being a minority, not in the reaction of whites to minorities. In other words, there's nothing wrong with being a minority unless we, who think we're the majority, and we aren't worldwide, but in this community, we're the majority. And how we act to minorities is the problem, not the minorities. We have to think about these things before we say them. And if you would get this list of typical statements Go to my website, jane@janeelliott.com. Download the list of typical statements, the clarifications of those statements, and then when somebody says them, you'll say, wait a minute, do you realize that what you just said really means, and they'll shut up and they won't ever speak to you again. And then after you do that, after you lose enough friends over that, then you go to the commitments to combat racism. 18 things that we can do in our own environments to change our level of racism. Have I spent some time recently looking at my own racist attitudes and behaviors as they contribute to or combat racism around and within me? People of color have to do that too, because we look at the way some colorless person behaves and we say, well, they're all like that. No, we aren't all like that. Right. So you have to stop and think, wait a minute, it's just that one is a fool. They aren't all fools. Mm-hmm. Every colorless person with red hair, while they may be of a different group completely and entirely, do not represent the way all people with red hair behave.
Right.
You have to decide whether you're going to deal in stereotypes, and stereotypes are real. Yeah. But it's only when you apply those stereotypes to every person of that group that you have a problem. You're going to do that. And then after you do that, those of you who want to make a change, get a copy of this. Everybody has seen this. This is the Mercator projection map. It's used throughout the schools in the United States of America, except Boston. Because they saw me on the Oprah show several years ago, and I showed the other map, they put a different map in the schools. But look at this. This is Greenland on this map. Look at the size of South America. Look at Greenland and look at the size of Africa. Mm-hmm. In fact, and at the bottom of the Mercator map, in some of them, it says, it isn't on this one, but there's a legend at the bottom that says, South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. That's what it says on the legend at the bottom. But this is what it shows. This is what kids see.
Why draw Greenland so large?
Right.
Because it's in the northern half of the earth, except that according to your social studies teachers, the equator separates the globe into 2 equal parts, right? The northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, because hemi means half. Mm-hmm. So 0 degrees should be halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole, right?
Right.
It should be right here. Not on this map, not on the Mercator map. It's 2/3 of the way down the map. 0 is clear down here. So this is the southern hemisphere, and this is the northern hemisphere. People, this is the miseducation of the American mind. Now, a man named Arlo Peters came up with a better map several years ago. Look at this map. See Greenland on this map?
Yes.
See South America? See Africa?
Different.
For the love of God, look at the difference. Of course, there's a difference. This map tells the truth. And equator is at 0 degrees, halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole. People, get the Mercator map out of the schools. You want to do something you can do? Go to school and take a bunch of these maps with you. Take a bunch of Peters projections maps with you. You can get them by going on your network, capital O, capital D, capital T, maps.com. Here it is. Can you see that?
Yes.
odtmaps.com. Can you see that?
Bring it back a little bit. There we go. Oh, yep.
You see it now? Mm-hmm. odtmaps.com. Tell them you want copies of the Peters projection map. Tell them that you heard about it from Jane Elliott. Now, I don't get anything out of telling you about these except the satisfaction of knowing that you're going to see to it that children don't see the Mercator map, only the Mercator map in the schools anymore. Kids have a right to see the truth.
Yes.
The shapes of these countries are distorted, but the sizes and the locations are right. And that's what you want, is a map that tells you the truth. Here is a Peters map history video that you can get. Where's the camera on this thing? I don't know. But anyway, you'll get copies of this. Tell them you want postcard size maps. You want placemat size. You can get these, and I bought them for placemats several years ago, so that when my kids sat down to eat breakfast in the morning, they were looking at a map the way I wanted them to see the world instead of the way the teachers wanted them to see the world. This is an extremely valuable piece of audiovisual education material. Take a look at it. It will change the way you see your world. And it's time for us to change the way students see their world. It won't change if you just send them to school and expect the school to take care of it, because they won't, because the teachers got the same education that I got. And so did their teachers get the same education that I got. It was not the truth. And then if you really want to have fun with your life, get this book, Famous Black Quotations. Now I'm going to use the word black there because this person does, but some of the quotations in this book will blow you out of the water. A child, according to James Baldwin, a child cannot be taught by someone who despises him.
So
That's
true.
powerful.
Very true.
Is that brilliant? A child cannot be taught by someone who despises him. It's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. Whitney Young said that. And if you want to learn about racism and what to do about it, you get Whitney Young's book, Beyond Racism. He died in a mysterious accident, boating accident off the coast of Africa, I believe, several years ago. But he wrote a brilliant book, I think in the early 60s, late 50s. It's called Beyond Racism, and it is full of information that you need. And then go on the net, type in Frederick Douglass quotes. And here's the one everybody needs to hear. He said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Where justice is denied, as it is in the United States. Where poverty is enforced, as it is in the United States. Where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor people will be safe. You need to realize that that man said those things while he was waiting to be killed. He didn't get killed. He lived a long time and said a lot of things. Go to the net and type in Frederick Douglass quotes and prepare to realize that everything you are doing now, he did a long time ago. And you didn't hear much about him in school because he was too damn smart for his own good.
And that's how it is.
That's why it is.
Yeah.
That's why it is. Keep your proud boys at home. Send me wise men. We need wise men in this country instead of proud boys, because those boys don't have anything to be proud of.
That's right. I'm so glad you said that, Jane Elliott. Again, it has been such a great honor to have you on to this show today on the Sistas Talk Podcast. I'm kind of lost for words because you just gave us so much information. And I love the fact that you're a very honest person. That's just something we don't come across too often. The fact that you are a diversity educator, it means so much to the entire planet, because there's so much misinformation right now. Even in the age of technology, it's very hard, with the changing of algorithms and things like that, for us to get the true knowledge and history.
Go to this magazine. Get this magazine, no matter what it costs you. Go to the library and demand that they get a copy of this. This was for autumn of 2016. And it will show you, this is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. It will show you, look at this page. These were all those humanoids that were on the earth at one time, but the only one that survived was right there, those Homo sapiens. They're the only group that survived, and that's what we are. This is just fascinating, because this is over 6 million years. We're talking about over 6 million years here. We're not talking about a century. We're not talking about 5 or 10 centuries. We're talking about 6 million years of progress. If you just read this, hear this. Instead of a featureless mass of cafe au lait colored clones, we are already starting to see a glorious riot of variation, dark-skinned, freckled blondes, and striking combinations of green eyes and olive skin. Think about that. This is the future that you're going to see. You are going to see all kinds of shades of brown and all kinds of colors of eyes. And we're all going to admit that we're all members of the same race, and there's only one. And we're going to laugh at people who say, well, we had laws against miscegenation when I was a child. And you're going to say, you lived too long, witch. You need to know. You can't have laws against marriage between the races when there's only one race. You got it? It's
I
time
got
to get over it. And there's only one. You and I are 30th to 50th cousins, like it or not. That's
All
the
right,
way
so
it
I'm gonna start
is.
calling you my cousin.
You can call me your cousin, and I'll be proud for you. I'll be so pleased if you call me my cousin. You, me, your cousin, because I'm calling you my cousin, whether you like it or not. That's the way it is.
There it
We have
is.
this. We have the same ancestor back there, 300,000 to 500,000 years ago.
There
And
it
your
is.
children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will live longer than mine will, because they will have the skin color that will protect their cells from the damaging rays of the sun, and mine won't have that. Except that some of them will, because my grandson married a person who calls herself a black woman. She's got lovely dark skin. I'm going to have some, and I've got two granddaughters that are part Saudi Arabian and part Anglo-American. And I've got another adopted grandson, great-grandson, who is part Hispanic. So here I have this family of differences, and it's absolutely the joy of my life. And I'm thinking, tell me I was wrong all those years. I dare you.
I love your energy.
Yes, I do as well.
Look, Jane is definitely a black woman. I love
Yes.
You're definitely a sister, and we welcome you to come back anytime you have time. We want to thank you so much for giving us some of your time, because my God, you have a lot of information, truthful information to share with the world, and we're honored.
Absolutely.
But most of what I've learned from people who look like you. Because people who look like me don't know it. That's the reason these quotations from people of color are so very important, because they are so very brilliant. And they're brilliant because of what people of your color group have been through and keep on keeping on in spite of it. You have to realize, I know that most people of color, most people who are melanaceous, who melanotic, and melanotic is in the dictionary, and it says someone with a lot of melanin in their skin, which just kills me. You need to know that most people who are melanotic have no idea how brilliant their forebears were, because we do not learn that. You have to insist that your kids learn that. You have to insist that anybody that you know that's a young person reads the book Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Anthony Browder. And you'll find out, just one of the things you'll find out is 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, people in Egypt, which is a country in Africa, it is not in the Middle East, we're doing cataract surgery. Yeah, thank you. We're doing cataract surgery with metal instruments before there was ever such a thing heard of in Asia or Europe or the Americas. You need to realize how brilliant your forebears were and how badly you have been miseducated to think that you were less than. If people who are melanaceous ever catch on to how brilliant they have been and how much we owe them, you read that book about Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization and find out what we got from the Egyptians, and it will blow you away. You will never again look at a calendar without saying, oh, we got the names for the months we got the idea of months from the Egyptians. Oh, we got peanut butter from a black man. Oh, we got the traffic light from a black man. Oh, we have shoes because of the behavior of a black man. Oh, a black man was the first person to reach the North Pole.
Thank you.
Oh, just a few little things like that.
So much confirmation here.
Yes, we've been doing this all month. We've been doing this all month.
Yes. This is what we've been doing the entire month.
But this is, if you were going to teach all of Black history, you would have to teach Black history every day of every month of the school year. 180 days, every day you would have to spend half an hour on Black history, because there is that much of it. It's the 6,000 years before the United States was called and that's another thing. Stop. I wish I should stop. There's one more thing you have to know. Stop calling this country America. Stop it now. Because America, this really pisses me off, you'll pardon my language, but makes me angry when we say this is America. America is everything from the northernmost point of Canada to the southern tip of South America. Everybody who lives in it, who is a citizen of any of those countries, is an American. We are citizens of the United States of America. And the most important part of that title is the word united. Those founding fathers, who incidentally had mothers, but those founding fathers called this the United States of America because the word united is so very important. We have had a president for 4 years who tried to make this the divided states of America. You must not allow that to happen. And in order to prevent that happening, you have to say, instead of just saying America from now on, and when you sing the song, America, you sing the USA, instead of America, America. It's time to start calling this what it is. America is more than the 48 contiguous states, Alaska, Hawaii, and the islands off the southern coast of the United States. America is all of this. The United States of America is this right here, and Alaska and Hawaii and those islands. It's time to be more precise, because if we don't call it what it is, we're going to lose it, because the young people won't realize how important the word united is.
I love
but
that.
You see the reason this fool calls it America, our former president, because I think he's slightly dyslexic. And when he sees united, he sees untied. They're spelled with the same letters, but in a different order.
You heard it here, right here at the Sistas Talk Podcast.
We definitely know the real.
Then have a lot of people angry, and we don't care.
I'll bet you have. I warned you about this. I warned you. People would rather live in the dark than light a candle.
That's right.
I'll stumble around in the dark. Don't you light a candle for me. I'd rather stumble around in the dark. I like my ignorance. I'm happy ignorant. Fine, but your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren are going to live with the results of your refusing to learn.
That's right. I love it.
It's powerful.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here with us. We truly appreciate this. We truly appreciate you being here. We truly appreciate you giving your time and educating us on topics that we would have probably never thought of.
Well, you wouldn't dare think of it, and now you're going to be in trouble because you did. If you get nasty letters and you don't know how to answer their questions, just send me the questions.
Okay.
Email the questions to me, and I'll email the answers back to you, and you can do with them what you want to. But you're going to get people saying, I like being called Black. Fine. If you want to be called Black, go to the thesaurus and find all the synonyms that you can for Black, and be really sure that that's the way you want your grandchildren to think of themselves. I'll never forget the so-called Black woman teacher who went through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise when I did it at Drake University with a group of teachers. And when it was over, she was sitting there crying. I said, what are you crying about? She said, because I realized that I do to my children of color just what the other teachers do. I expect less of them because they're Black. I said, well, maybe it's time for you to stop considering them Black and start considering them children who have more melanin in their skin, which is going to be a great advantage for them in about 30 or 40 or 50 years.
That's impactful.
Yeah, but there she sat crying, and I think of those young children who try to bleach their skin because they've been taught that their color makes them less than. It's such an absolutely ignorant statement to use any longer. We have to stop this. Anyway, thank you. If you get ugly letters, send them to me. I get ugly letters. I get lots of ugly letters. Some of them I just throw away. But if they come from your group, I'll read them and type them up and answer. And then my iPad will probably explode, and I'll have to go use a different computer. But
we'll get you a new one, Jane. No worries.
You can, okay.
Cousin Jane. So
we have that on tape now. We have that on tape.
Yes,
but sisters are going to buy me a new one.
Got it. All right. Binding contract.
Elliott is our cousin. Sistas Talk is Jane Elliott's cousin. All right.
Period. So guys who's watching, make sure you go to her website. It's janeelliott.com. She has fantastic information there. It's for every color of the human race. We all need to get educated on who we are, what we contributed to society and the world in general. That's what makes us the human race. That's what makes us human. And we have to get back to that. That's been our message the entire month of February. But just like Jane said, if you want to study Black history, you're going to have to study it every day. And we just said this a few days ago. Black history is history. We're all in this together, and we have to change our mindsets. That's the biggest thing here. Jane Elliott, thank you. It was an honor today. We really appreciate you. We look forward to catching back up with you over tea or something later on this year.
Yeah.
Good. Come to my home in Iowa in the summertime,
Okay.
and
All
we'll sit around and drink tea and solve all the problems of the world. Iced tea if it's hot tea if it's cold, water if you can't get either one.
I love it.
But I'll also, if you really want it, I'll let you have a sip of my Uncle Nearest whiskey. And I don't drink, but do you know anything about Uncle Nearest whiskey? He's the man who taught the other guy who does such good whiskey how to do it. It's a good story. Anyway, thank you.
Love her, guys. All right, guys, make sure you go check out her website. It was an honor. Aisya, any final words before we wrap up?
Just thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning into the Sistas Talk Podcast. We'll see you next Sunday. Bye.
Bye now.
All right, we're going to stop our live streams here. Give me a second. That was fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna leave. So you can talk about me after I'm gone.